This is a topic that it probably goes to the heart of most of us. It's not an easy thing to forgive for a lot of people. So I'm very interested in hearing how each of us brings our own insights into this topic. Just to let you know, if you're not familiar, this is a living room conversation. You can find out more about the organization online. And we will begin. So forgiveness, let's talk about that. So the first four sacred gifts is forgive the unforgivable. Why, how, must we? Forgiving wrongs, intentional, unintentional, historic, big and small is not a small thing. For many of us, this can be very challenging. There's so many ways that we're hurt by others and that we hurt others in our lives. How we manage those hurts is a key part of shaping our lives internally and externally. How can forgiveness help us to become the person that we want to be? And this conversation is actually based on Anita Sanchez's book, The Four Sacred Gifts, Indigenous Wisdom for Modern Times. And we have Anita right here with us on the top left-hand corner.
Yes, I'm very excited to be with all of you. Thank you for coming and agreeing to be recorded. As you know, this is a very important topic, and Indigenous elders from all over the world see this as one of the key four gifts to help us with getting connected. So it's total fit for living room conversations for us to listen to each other. And with that, before we begin into learning who's here and everything, I want to remind you that our agreements are up here, and this is my first time to facilitate this process. So Pedro, should we go through this first, or should we have gone through is this okay?
We can go through the conversation agreement.
Yes, so some of you have printed that out. Those of you viewing, welcome. And I think each one of these agreements is very important, so we're gonna just quickly go over those because they're for all of us to keep us all on track. So this conversation agreement is to be curious and open to learning. I'm not going to read all the sentence, but that's what's really important here. It's to show respect and suspend judgment. We tend as human beings to want to judge one another. So we're going to do our best to set those judgments aside. And as my elders talk about, listening with the softest part of your ear and the softest part of your heart. The third agreement is to find common ground and note differences. So it's not one or the other, but really listen to both, being present, the similarities and the differences. Next is to be authentic and welcome that from others. We welcome our various uniquenesses and differences as well as our similarities. So speak authentically about what your personal experience is, rather than something else, okay? Speaking from I. Be purposeful and to the point. We have 90 minutes for this whole dialogue, but that does mean with 7 of us to be more laser focused, but still bringing in your full experience and emotion as possible. And own and guide the conversation, that each and every one of us own this process. Several of us are helping to guide the process along, but it's really all of us will take part. We each are a leader in this process. Okay, so I just would like to get agreement that that everyone agrees to those items that are on your sheet. The nod means yes. This means I don't know what you're talking. Okay, good. That's great. So we want to offer just a couple of tips. Everyone shares responsibility again for guiding the conversation and keeping it on track. So if you feel like it's going off, then we'll together we'll just recalibrate the course. The group can decide to keep track of time, and that can be done even with actually a minute each to do something. And we might want to begin with that. Is that okay with everyone? Just to get all 7 of us, and then we can open it up more when we get into the depths of the conversation if it looks like it's flowing. I see yes, agree to that. So Pedro, if you wouldn't mind helping with keeping track of the time.
Okay.
Those. If an area of interest has arisen that's taken the group off topic, then we just ask that one or all of us, whoever can just say, we'll take that later, after, separate from this conversation. Might make for another good conversation in another living room. If someone is dominating or being disruptive on a soapbox or trying to debate, this is not the purpose here again. It is really to listen and to learn, hearing the similarities and differences. And then finally, if the group opts to shift from the format of living room conversations, please provide us for future feedback. We really need the feedback to know if there's ways. It's always evolving and improving, but we found this format really works for everyone to be treated with dignity, to be heard, listened to. Okay, so we're all in agreement with that?
Yep.
Okay. So round one is, as we get started, is we're just curious to hear your name, where you're at, and what interests you or drew you to this conversation. And I'll go ahead and start, and then I'll call on some people. Obviously, Pedro already said that I am the author of The Four Sacred Gifts, Indigenous Wisdom for Modern Times. And you'll get, as we get further in, I know a lot about forgiveness. And I just have, for 22 years, using this gift in a very conscious way, has opened up so many things. So I'm here not saying everyone needs to forgive. I really am keeping an open heart and mind, but just really with all the division and stuff, I'm excited about having this conversation with people who have diversity, who have different kinds of belief systems, political ideology, and all sorts of other things, how we can still be connected and listen to each other. So that's for me. And each person takes about a minute. We can do that with this one. Jane, is it okay if I just circle around?
Sure. My name is Jane Hausman. I live in Delafield, Wisconsin. And obviously, forgiveness is an incredibly powerful tool that you can use. The true forgiveness, I think, can only take place when you let your hurt go away. Otherwise, and I think that comes in stages. It comes in, you just can't, if someone really hurts you, you just can't forgive the next day. You have to process your hurt and pain before you can decide. And you may take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. I don't know. But, it's a process that we go through. And in the end, hopefully you can forgive. If not, forgive that person, but forgive yourself so that you can go forward. That's what I think forgiveness is.
Thank you, Jamie, for telling us that's a big piece of the topic. Is why it drew you here. Thank you. And Jamie, could we hear from you? What interested you or drew you to this conversation? 1 minute or less.
Sure. So I'm Jamie. I live in the DC area, right outside of DC in Arlington. And I think I'm interested in the topic because it's not something that I think about a lot, but I know it's something I can improve on. I wouldn't say that forgiveness is like my best quality. And so I'm definitely interested in learning more about it and like what it means to other people.
Wonderful. And Devlin.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. I was really drawn to this topic both as personally because I've had my own personal experience around forgiveness that I'll share later, but from a bigger macro perspective, I'm wondering, like, there is so much hurt in our world right now. How do we go about kind of reconciling socially the wrongs that have been done to each other? And then also back to the personal level, just my own discomfort with not knowing, what to do with the First Nations people or the African American people that came to this country or were here already. There's been horrible things done over generations, and I don't know what to do with that. So that's part of what interested me as well.
Thank you, Devlin. Q Lee.
Hi, my name is Q Lee. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. And I've read Anita's book, and I really like the fact that where she defines what forgiveness is not. And so that was a different perspective for me, because a lot of times we think about, forgive and let and forget, but you don't forget. And I think part of not forgetting is learning from the lessons. And for me, forgiveness is very healing. So that's what I'm here for.
Great, thank you. And John.
I'm John Kessler. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I think forgiveness is a hugely important topic for us in the world right now. I have a belief framework around it. I have a meditation and life practice where forgiveness is an important element of that. So I'll look forward to sharing that later on.
Look forward to hearing that. Thank you. And Pedro.
Yeah, forgiveness for me is, well, my name's Pedro. I live in Boulder, Colorado as well. In terms of forgiveness personally, I've like kind of cultivated this mindset that I don't actually have the right not to forgive. And if I don't forgive, then I'm robbing myself and whoever I'm choosing not to forgive. And I base that on the relationship between the sun and the moon, and that the sun will continually shine its light on the moon, and the moon can like reject the sun, could do whatever it wants to do, and the sun will continue to shine its light. If the sun waiting for something doesn't shine its light, the sun loses its beingness, and it takes from the moon. So I just try to cultivate that inside of myself. And then I'm a minister, so I have to encourage people towards that sometimes. And so I like to hear other perspectives about how to do that locally and globally.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. Go ahead, Devlin. We can't hear you, Devlin, if you could
I unmuted. I'm sorry about that. I just forgot to say I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Yes, and thank you. And I'm in Boulder as well. So there's a Boulder continuum,
wow.
a lot of West Coast here. Not totally, but so the round two, I think we'll continue with the timing to get everyone in, and then maybe we'll open a little more for the round three. But round two is, as you can see on your guide, is to answer one or more of the following. You have 1 minute to do that. You can see the questions. It's one sense of purpose, mission, or duty guide your life. What would your best friend say about who you are and what makes you tick? Or what are your hopes and concerns for your community or your country? Looking forward to hearing from each of you. This time, can we start with you, Pedro?
Okay. My mission statement at this present moment is be less and less of a hypocrite every day until I'm not a hypocrite anymore. and that'll be awesome. And that's my mission statement. My best friends probably would say, I take this like certain aspect of my walk probably too serious. It may say I don't let myself be human enough, but I just kind of like don't agree that human just means everything. You just fail and be all right with it. It's like, oh, I'm human. I don't agree with that, but being human is not an excuse to me. Yeah. So.
All right. Thank you. John, would you willing to take one or two of those?
Sure. One thing I spend a lot of time with is a nonprofit called the Salt Lake Global Civil Network, and we're deeply engaged in exploring the interrelationship between individual, family, community, and global flourishing. And so I'm, very concerned about how can that happen? And I sense that this issue of forgiveness is an enormously important element. Mm-hmm. And so I spend a lot of time being concerned and hoping and dreaming about what might be possible in that regard.
Thank you. Q Lee, can you take one or two of those? Yes.
Yeah, can you read those questions to me again?
Yes. Share your sense of purpose, mission, or duty. What would your best friend say about you? Or share what are your hopes and concerns for your community or your country?
I think right now, like, the friends that I talk to, they'll disclose certain, issues or problems to me that they're dealing with. And a lot of it actually has to do with them being angry at somebody else or blaming others for things. And I find that, I think for me, I'm really trying to take responsibility for my actions and what I've done in order to, I guess, change my role in life. And that's something that I find with other people too, that instead of taking responsibility for their own actions so that they can understand what happened to the other people or the situation, then they can't forgive because they're blaming other people. Oh, well, they did it this, and I can't forgive them because it's their fault and not, I don't have it, I didn't do anything. So that's something that I try to give a different perspective on things for myself, and then also to friends and the people that I talk to.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. And Devlin.
Thanks, Anita. So my sense of purpose, mission, or duty that guides my life right now is how to be a contribution, how to help impact the world to be a better place, and specifically along the lines of in this current kind of state of upheaval that we're in culturally and politically, there's a sense, or my interpretation of that is that we are actually renegotiating our social contract with each other. Mm. And so my specific purpose and duty right now is to help us do that in a conscious way. And instead of continuing to do the squabbling and the fighting, playing the blame game, which are unhealthy aspects of how we renegotiate when things feel unfair. And so that's a lot of, and my friends would say that I'm very serious and intense.
Thank you. Jamie.
You mean Jane? Is there a
Jane?
Jane?
Named Jamie. Is it Jamie or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Jamie. Yeah. So I'll answer the third question. And it's sort of similar to what other people have been saying, but my concerns right now are the growing divides in this country, whether that be political or rural and urban, and just all of the various ways that we seem to be more and more divided every day. But I'm very lucky in that the work that I do is helping me to sort of follow my passion and try to help solve some of those divides. And my hope is that we can just do better, get to know other people, and understand that the other side of whatever issue isn't, just crazy or evil or anything like that, but that we're all people, and we need to understand each other as people first and not, just ideas.
Great. And Jane.
Hi. Well, I'm retired and I focus a lot on my grandchildren and children. I volunteer. I like to volunteer. I work 1 day a week for my son. I try to stay positive. My friends would say that I'm a no-nonsense person. I'm honest, maybe too honest sometimes, but I try not to be too honest because it's counterproductive sometimes. And I'm really into yoga because that's what I do to calm myself down when I'm getting too intense about what goes on in life in general, in politics and all the things that go on. I pretty much focus on myself and my kids and grandkids. And I do give to the community. I do volunteer. And that's about what I do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jane, I'm going to ask you to make sure your audio is turned all the way up so that we don't miss. We got everything, but it's a little bit hard to hear. So thank you. For me, what's calling me is, it's a lifetime thing. As a little girl, I dreamt about, I knew I was going to be when I grew up. I drew a circle of the earth and all of us holding each other's hearts. And I just really believe that we're all connected, which fits with my indigenous and my Latino teaching about being one hoop of life. And so for the last 40 years, people see me as the eternal optimist. And I have not only worked with people in warring countries with each other, but also inside of companies and communities that have difficulty living together, working together, and helping them to bridge their differences and see their similarities. And some days I'm pretty like, oh gosh, this is a lot of work. And then I see sparks happening of people really reaching across and helping. And so I think people would basically say that I'm more of an optimist, and I'm persistent and don't give up. Okay, so it's so nice to have you all here. And now let's get deeper, even deeper into in this third round about forgiveness, get actually into that topic. And if you look at your guide, remember that the goal of this conversation is to listen and to learn, where we have different opinions, and where we have shared interests, intentions, and goals. So just really listen as best you can. And again, I'm going to ask you to answer one or more of the following questions. So here are the questions for those of you who don't have your guide in front of you. The first one is, what is your experience of forgiveness? What have you forgiven and why? That's one. Are there people you have to forgive or you will never forgive, that you have yet to forgive but you never will, and why is that? What are the benefits or detriments of forgiving for yourself, for the other person, for the community, for the nation, for the world, whatever? How does one or should one ever forgive the unforgivable? And what is it like if you ever imagine doing this, whether you have done it or imagine doing it? And then the last one, and I realize these are fairly long, what does forgiveness mean and what does it not include? So in this round, we're going to have about 35 minutes or so. So we take longer. I'm going to ask Pedro, who's facilitated these a lot, if you can kind of manage this round in whatever way that makes more sense for the group to have richness come through.
Okay, and if for those of us who are on the call, I did post those questions in the chat room, so you can look on if you need a refresher. So just look over to the side, and I won't start us off. I'll let one of you start us off. How about John? And just answer one or more of those questions. Let's try to stick to like one or two for right now, and then we can just wrap back around if all of us have had a chance to answer.
So I'm looking at how does one or should one ever forgive the unforgivable? What is it like if you ever imagine doing this? Well, I have a practice that I developed that I've shared for a lot of years. I call it integral polarity practice. And it's working with polarities. And I work with about 15 primary polarities, and they're endless polarities. But one that's relevant to this topic is the polarity of alignment and deviation. It's sort of working with issues of making mistakes and moving back and forth and whatnot. And the ultimate point of the practice is to find a still point that brings that energy to a resting point. And that still point in this arena for me is wholeness, is a sense of deep transcendent wholeness in this moment. And when you're in that place, a few things, I call them virtues of becoming and doing, naturally just arise. And one of the qualities or virtues that I call them that naturally arise from a place of wholeness is forgiveness, a deep transcendent forgiveness, a sense that everything is to be forgiven. And the other quality of more of a personal attribute is one of integrity. So I have a practice, a recognition in that sense that if I am not prepared to fully forgive, I don't have full integrity, I'm not fully whole, I'm not being connected to all things in that way. So it's, it's my practice, and it's consistent with my faith tradition. And it's a way to be in a meditative place and to have a practice. And my experience with it has really helped me through some difficult times personally, and gives me hope for a sense that this is possible. So that's what I'd like to just share in terms of my own personal practice in that regard, and a practice that I share with others.
Jane, you want to take a shot at it?
Yeah. Well, I've been divorced a couple times, so I've had a lot of forgiving to do and a lot of being forgiven. And mostly, mostly because you can't move on if you don't forgive. I mean, if you just get stuck and you start getting revengeful and you're looking for justice, and those are the wrong things to look for. But mostly, I did that for my kids. We both did it for our kids, so that they could have a sense of whole, and they could have a sense of two parents who still loved them, even though they didn't, weren't living together. So I think in that regard, forgiveness was extremely important. Are there people I've not forgiven? Yes, there are. Because sometimes I put, and this may be wrong, I put conditions on my forgiveness. Certain things have to be done. I mean, I've moved on. I can say I forgive you. I haven't forgotten. And it's not going to change the relationship for the better until, I'm not happy, with this person. So I don't dwell on it. I don't look for revenge. I don't look for justice. But I didn't forget. I let's just say I forgave, but I didn't forget, and it didn't make our relationship better. But I'm okay, and it's the other person's responsibility to be okay. I think, not mine.
Devlin, next.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I want to just share my story of forgiveness that kind of was, for me, transformational. And it happened, like many people, I grew up in an alcoholic, abusive family, highly dysfunctional. And my stepfather was the primary abuser, and my mother was the kind of the enabler, so to speak. And as I became an adult and I kind of looked back at my childhood, I was really pissed off that I didn't actually get to have a childhood. I just, I feel like I got robbed, and there was just a lot of underlying resentment and anger that things weren't different than how they actually were. And through a personal development course that I was taking, I had to look at what are some of my underlying super beliefs that kind of guide my life. And they walked us through a process about how to kind of look at this. And when I got down to this belief about I kept going, it's just a fact. It's not an opinion that I was an abused child. It's just a fact. It's what happened. And my colleagues just kept kind of pushing me and pushing me and pushing me until I actually sat down and opened it up and looked at what was in my heart about this particular situation of how I had grown up. And I came to understand that I was holding on to it from this sense of self-righteousness to justify everything I thought and felt about them. And at the moment that I had that recognition of oh, this is just me wanting to be right and holding on to this anger and hurt, I let go. It was like this transformative moment that was further, and I felt it. And then about a week later, I went to visit my mom, and I literally walked in the room, and she looked at me and she said, "What happened? You look lighter." There was a physical change that she could see in me because I had gone through this process of forgiveness and let it go. And so for me, forgiveness is not about forgetting, because that stuff still all happened to me, but it was about, I'm no longer going to hold it against them as we move into the future. And so I was able to have a much different relationship with my mother. My relationship with my stepfather never recovered. He did not choose that, and that was okay. But I was at peace with it. And so for me, I want to know how we can, other people can have that transformative experience so that the past can be the past and we let it inform us for a better future.
Kyoli.
Pedro. So what I want to share is, like I said before, what I've been working on a lot lately is about taking responsibility. And so about maybe 4 years ago, I was going through a separation with my ex-husband, and we have 2 daughters. And during that time, I had a lot of self-reflection that I needed to go through. And one of the things that happened was I took on this gig of writing that I found on Craigslist, it was, I was working for this one man, and he asked me to write on a topic about abuse. And so when I started looking at myself, I realized, excuse me, that I was actually the abuser. I never thought of myself as that. But that it was more verbal abuse. And so that's what I mean, like when I look at myself, and I think people need to look at themselves too, and just take responsibility for their situation and not just blame it on circumstances or other people. So I took that on, and when that came up, my realization that I was actually verbally abusing him during our marriage, it also made me look at my parents and the relationship between my mom and my dad as well. And I saw it. And after that realization, it made me sad, but I'm glad I realized that I can hold to it, take responsibility for it. And after that, what I did was I wrote a very long letter to my ex, which took days. I wrote a bit, each day, and then another, maybe a few days later, I'd have some more thoughts I wanted to put down. And I wrote more to him, apologizing for my action and just taking responsibility for what happened to our relationship. I wasn't expecting him to, take responsibility for his. This was for me. It was very healing for me to recognize that. And not only that, but after I wrote that letter to him, I did send it to him. But I also looked at all my other relationships, like with my sisters. What did I do wrong, in those respects? And my older sister and my younger sister, and my parents as well. And I also wrote letters to each of them asking for their forgiveness as well. So that's my main thing, is not just about forgiving others, but asking for others' forgiveness because I'm taking responsibility for what happened in the situation. And in this lifetime, I do believe that we all make mistakes, but we can also all correct them. Other people might not accept it, and that's okay. That's their journey, but this is my journey. And what can I do on my part to, once I die, to not have any regrets or resentment when I am on my deathbed.
Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to call on myself next, just because I just finished sharing a story similar to yours, Keely, with a friend. When I was married before, I kind of try to practice like this preemptive forgiveness, where I just want to kind of have myself, not like suspecting someone's going to do something wrong, but just trying to make forgiveness be my natural response to things. And so I had to cultivate it even when something's not actively happening. And so I found myself in a situation with my ex where some behavior was happening over and over. And in my tradition, my spiritual tradition, the question is asked, how many times must you forgive somebody for the same offense? And then the answer is 70 times 7, which is, mathematically is 490. But the way that I interpret it is you forgive until you lose count, And so I would forgive my partner. And I did, it's like, I knew she was coming from a different place, so I didn't really blame her. But at the same time, I just kept being open. And in that particular case, if she didn't feel like she deserved the forgiveness, so instead of just being like, okay, well, let's move forward, it made her angrier and thought I was kind of stupid. And then eventually we separated, and then she ended up writing me a letter too, later. And as she was going along, she just kept like writing letters every time she had an awareness. And I had to go through a little piece of myself because I wanted the relationship to work. But in reflection, I kind of thought, well, maybe I should have not forgiven so easily. Maybe we would have had more dialogue about it. If I had not said, it's okay, I know you didn't mean it, just like, let's just not do that. So there's some tension there with forgiveness and how it's given and received. But ultimately, I think that both of us came out better for it, you know. And I felt like I had to forgive myself a little bit because I did, in trying to be preemptive in my forgiveness, I didn't hear some of the things that had her feel like she had to express herself that way. So I don't know. That's my little story. And I guess we'll go to Anita.
Yes. Well, I'm one of those human beings that have a lot of stories of needing to forgive and be forgiven. And the one that's calling to me right now, though, is one that some people have told me, oh, that's forgiving the unforgivable. And that was, I was 13 and my father was murdered. He used to work in a steel mill, and after work, he'd go get a beer after work. And he went there to get a beer, and where earlier that day, he didn't know, it was in the 60s, a black man and a white man were there, and they had an argument. And when he was sitting there, the white man returned and just saw the profile, his dark skin, and fired several bullets through his head and killed him on the spot. So that was huge and traumatic. And my mom with kids, 9 to 19, and so there's lots of feelings about that. And but what happened a week later is the story I want to tell you about, which was there was a knock at the door, and it was a white woman and a young boy who looked like he was around my age. I was beside my mom, and this woman introduced herself as the wife and the son of the man who murdered my father. And she just was saying things like, I just had to meet you. I just needed to let you know my husband is not a bad man. He thought your husband was black. He never would have killed him if he knew he was Mexican and Native American. And she was saying these things. And my mom was very indigenous and very Catholic, both. And I remember her shaking, and one of the few times I remember her yelling at this total stranger and saying, stop, you don't even know what you're saying. You don't even know the hatred you're teaching your son, but I'm going to try really hard to pray for your soul that you get off my porch. And that night, take a breath, and that night she gathered us 6 kids together in the living room, and she said something to me that was so important. She looked at us all and she said, I want you all to know that a white man murdered your father, not the white race. A white man. And then she opened the Kansas City Star, the newspaper, where there was a picture of my father in a pool of blood on the bar floor. And she goes, now this is racism. My mom never talked about racism, but she said that night, this is racism. Whenever a person of color dies, they show all the violence of it. It was a white person, we got to stop this. This needs to stop. So it's not a surprise to the work I do in diversity and inclusion all over the world. But what happened with time, and this is where forgiveness didn't happen immediately for me with that. Even though I went into diversity inclusion with a real open heart, believing we could come together, there was a part of me that didn't believe that. But as I heard white men and women in corporations speaking about how their parents taught them that they were better than other people of color, and yet I saw them behaving differently, I saw them changing policies, I saw them doing all sorts of things, I think what happened is that little girl, Anita, learned something. And as I began dreaming that day when that woman and that young boy, in my dreams, I could see everything, everyone, I could see it all, but I couldn't see the young white boy's face. It's like I washed it away. But over time of hearing the stories, to this day, I could see this young boy's face. I would know what he looked like as a man. And how I made sense of that was that I, not knowing as a 13-year-old, believed that white boy was going to do the same thing his dad and the same thing as his mom, if not murder, but saying horrible things. And I took away his humanity. I literally took away his face. And that made me sick. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do what happened to me. So I know today, if I was back then with the knowledge I had, I would have invited that that white boy into my house. Because that day, that summer day, I lost my father. But that white boy lost his father too and grew up knowing he was a murderer. So there's so much of this separation that's happening. And what I will say for me is there was a total release when I realized what was happening and how I could be in the world in line with my beliefs, particularly my indigenous beliefs that we're all connected. And I, to this day now, believe there is nothing unforgivable. And I'm not trying to convince anyone. I just want to tell you the truth from my heart. I believe there is absolutely nothing that is unforgivable because I am worthy of love. You are worthy of love, and we're worthy to be free of the pain and hurt, the prison of that, so that we can create the world we want. And that I want to put all my energy into.
So, Jamie, I think you're our final.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for sharing your stories. Those are all really powerful. Yeah, so for me, I think, like I said, forgiveness isn't like my strong suit at all. And I kind of have a similar story to Pedro in that I was in a really tumultuous, emotionally abusive relationship when I was a little younger. And I think that because I was so forgiving of, inappropriate actions, that now I'm really guarded and still am not able to forgive this person. And so I guess I didn't really think about it until we started this conversation, but that holds me back in many ways. Just because now it's like I've overcorrected for the problem, and then I'm just too guarded and too unforgiving. Like I often joke with my friends that I'm pretty easily to get along with. Like nothing really sets me off, but once I'm upset, I'm upset, and I'm not going to get over it very quickly. But I guess I've just never thought about how that's affecting me. But I also, at the same time, it's like I don't know how to forgive and to move on, and that's just something I just don't know how to do, I guess, in many aspects of my life. And so, yeah, forgiveness is really hard, and I guess I hadn't really had a deep thoughts about it until right now, but it's really hard.
Yeah, so I think everyone had an opportunity to go, and we were pretty good on time. So if anybody wants to look at one more of those questions and just take like a minute or so to go around them, we can, or we can go and move into number 4. But number 4 is the reflection. And I think we still have a little bit of time that we could go around one more time for a minute or so before going into reflection, if everyone's comfortable with that. Yeah, Devin.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of came up for me in listening to other stories too, and so I'd like to just kind of bounce around a little bit if we could.
Yeah.
My transformative story happened after I told myself for 15 years I should forgive them, but I didn't know how. So I think I wanted just to kind of throw that in there, and I'll probably add that at another time. But self-forgiveness, I'm not hearing any stories about self-forgiveness here as well. And what do we need to forgive ourselves for? And what does that look like? Because I had to forgive myself for my divorce because I was somewhat abusive, verbally abusive in my second marriage. And so there's been this whole other element of self-forgiveness that I don't know what else to say about that other than I'm curious now for us in this small group in this sacred space we've created about self-forgiveness too.
If it's all right if I jump in real quick on that. I slightly tried to allude to it in my piece about my former relationship, because I started to feel at one point that it was my fault because I let it go on too long, trying to hold on to my like religious belief that I like caused both of us harm because she couldn't stop because I just kept like allowing and allowing and allowing, and I didn't create a boundary, which sometimes a boundary can be compassionate, and I didn't create one. I basically was like, just keep on coming. And at one point she said, it's your fault I treat you this way because you don't know how to, she basically told me it's my fault, and I didn't understand that. So then once we were not together, I reflected on it, and then I thought, oh man, she probably was asking for a boundary, and I didn't know how to give it to her because I wanted to be a forgiving person, you know? And so I was allowing it. So then I had to forgive myself for being over forgiving, you know? But then I reflected on it and realized that sometimes, just like with and it's not to diminish anyone, but just like with a child, sometimes you have to say stop because the child just doesn't know. I had to integrate that boundary into my forgiveness practice for the sake of myself and for the other person. And so and some people said, well, what do you have to forgive yourself for? Like some of my friends, when I was telling them I'm like working on forgiving myself. But in retrospect, she was communicating something to me. I just didn't know how to hear it. And so I was able to make that shift over time. And sometimes it still comes up, you know, when I might say, I don't know, then I'm like, no, okay. It's like work with it.
Yeah. I'll add on to that. I believe there was some forgiving myself for taking away that boy's space. But I also know that part of what was happening is I had to be listening to myself. And so what I had done from all the hurts and mistreatments from abuse and the murder of my father, just on and on, being Mexican-American and Native American, there are so many things that happen all the time. But I put up some armor. This armor, I believe I had, it kept out all the bad stuff. But what happens is it keeps out the good stuff too. So I wasn't loving myself. I wasn't letting good things come to me either, kept out everything. And so part of my ability to forgive myself for putting up this armor, for not allowing myself as a lovable human being, worthy of dignity, respect, love, all of that, was to start taking that down. And it was scary to do that because I was afraid of getting hurt again. But as I experienced sometimes a few hurts, but far more good things, I realized that I had to make a real decision about, is the world a safe place or not? Is it an abundant place or not? And am I part of it? So I think it's a hard one. Sometimes it's easier to forgive the other than yourself, but it's part of the process for me that it's a path to freedom, a freedom of really understanding what that means, freedom and love and ability to be in relationship with other people without all the baggage and all the cynicism and things.
I guess one thing I could say about self-forgiveness is I've found forgiving myself to be difficult because, as I can say, well, at least within myself, I'm aware of what I need to do or should say or be in order to be properly forgiven. And yet, at the same time, I have a practice that says forgive everybody. And what that, frankly, just fairly recently has helped me decouple the act of forgiveness from the act of accountability. Is that I can forgive. I have to learn this about myself. I can forgive myself even though I'm still accountable. In some deep spiritual place, I can be whole, even though I know I have a lot to work on and I haven't been accountable enough. And that's been really tough for me, but it's also helping me appreciate that maybe I've had a little bit of emotional resentment about being so freely forgiving because I couldn't decouple accountability from forgiveness. And so I'm trying to learn how to hold that.
I'm curious what everyone's definition of forgiveness is.
I like John's like kind of return to wholeness idea.
For me, it's about letting go of the past. So like in my current relationship with another person who has addiction issues, I'm not holding when something is forgiven, it's done, and I don't bring it up over and over and over again. It's like it's past. And until it's at that point, it's not actually forgiveness for me. So it's that letting go of what was, so we can create that future we want.
Yeah.
I think forgiveness for me is a process. If you've been deeply hurt, you cannot just forgive the next day. You have got to reflect, and you do set up boundaries and you do protect yourself. That's just human nature, that you would protect yourself. You've got to learn, obviously, to take down those boundaries at times. But I think that true forgiveness, you have to let go of the hurt, but you also have to take a couple steps forward, a couple steps back until you're ready to forgive totally. And if that person's willing to accept it at that point, that's okay. But at least you've gone through the process and you're at peace with yourself, and you've forgiven yourself. That's forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. For me, forgiveness is releasing bottled up energy from hurts, mistreatment, what happened, what didn't happen, but releasing that energy so that I can use it to love myself and love others. And in getting to the definition of forgiveness, I realized in my experiential process of that was I had all sorts of beliefs of what forgiveness was that wasn't truth. That I believed that if I forgave, that I would be weak, that I was betraying not only myself, but people who look like me. That if I forgave, that meant I didn't seek justice, the accountability. No, it still means you seek justice, but it doesn't mean that you're all wrapped up in the hurts, resentment, revenge, all the stuff that kills and poisons yourself. Does nothing about the situation, and clearly isn't loving and creating, healthy systems and healthy relationships. So thank you for that question, because it's an important one for us. What are we talking about?
Well, and I think like everybody's definition of a certain word is different.
Mm-hmm.
There's similarities, but then there's also a little bit of differences as well. And for me, forgiveness is about letting go, but also what Jane said, it's a process. It takes years sometimes. And there's still, even with my mom, sometimes I think I forgive her, but I don't really know. When I talk to her, if I've actually forgiven her. So it's a process that takes years. Can we shorten it somehow?
I think that sometimes we can go in and out of wholeness.
Yeah.
And if forgiveness is a return to wholeness, just using that as a baseline, I think that it's possible to actually forgive someone and then have like an event that throws you off of that center.
Yeah.
And then you experience yourself as it's linear, like, oh, I forgave and then I didn't forgive. But I don't think it is that. I think it's you're embodying a certain space, but you can return back to that space, and it doesn't diminish the forgiveness that you initially put out there. And also we evolve over time as well. And so we might look at the same thing and just learn from it and revisit it, and it still doesn't mean we haven't forgiven, so.
Jamie, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about it's like, should we forgive everything, or it just doesn't seem fair to me. And maybe I'm 23 and I don't know that much about the world yet, but it's just it seems unfair that someone, if they just forgive them, it's like they've gotten away with it. And I think that that's what I struggle with, because it's also like I want to forgive someone, but still I don't want them to be in my life. I don't want to have a relationship with them. And it's like, if that's how I feel, have I really forgiven them? Have I really moved on? If they're still controlling my life in some way, and that I just want to avoid them. And so it's so complicated. And it's like, what if everything's forgivable, then it's like it's not fair. But I don't know, maybe that's just my unnuanced version of it.
I love it, Jamie. If I could add to that, because I would like to invite you sometime to a talking circle with Indigenous people, because here are people whose genocide against us, land taken, continually systems, all this, and who is the one that when I was looking for healing told me, forgive the unforgivable? The Indigenous people said, you look at this. This is a path to forgive the unforgivables. But it doesn't seem fair at all. Like, what do you mean? I get all the pain and then I get to, and yeah, so it's a good thing to explore. And for me, it just came back to how I want to live my life and love myself and be connected to others. But don't hear that as a judgment. I think it's really tough. And I'm really amazed by my elders who say, after everything they've been through and continue to be through, forgive the unforgivable.
I think you can forgive somebody, Jamie, without being their friend again. I mean, what you're doing, you forgive is you let go of the hurt and the pain. It doesn't mean that you have to keep going back for abuse or whatever.
A second helping.
Exactly, for letting that person back in your life. You can just let go of the pain, let go of the judgment, and just, okay, it didn't work. Well, bye now. That's what I do. I'm kind of set boundaries. And I do try to let go of the pain and the hurt and say, okay, this friendship didn't work. I wish you no harm, but I don't want you in my life. And I don't know if that's bad, but that's what I do.
I mean, I also wonder about forgiving people who aren't sorry or don't think they did anything wrong. I find that's just so hard, because like, I want you to realize that you were wrong or you hurt me or something, and people who just can't even see that, then I just don't understand how you can forgive them.
Well, you can't make them see what they've done wrong. All you can do is say, okay, I'm going to let go of this anger and pain, and I'm going to go on with my life. I don't have to go on with the relationship, but I have to let go of the pain and the anger. That's what I think.
I guess that's what I was trying to express a little bit too, is exploring how to decouple the sense of forgiveness, having a narrower definition of forgiveness, that it doesn't mean that I say you're not accountable or I'm not accountable, or I judgment about this. But if I can free myself up, as Anita said, to have in full forgiveness, I can break myself open to love. I can still follow through and be maybe even more directive and more assertive in terms of what's not happening that should have happened or should be happening towards myself or towards others. And in that sense, in a sense, is allowing a fracture within myself to heal, so that I'm not suffering under some deficit, but touching into a wholeness, realizing we all can touch into a wholeness, but nevertheless being even freer in that sense to demand justice if it calls for that, or to demand accountability, or to acknowledge to myself that I'm being a hypocrite. And I'll forgive myself, but boy, I still have a lot to do to make this right.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it just depends on the energy with which you're coming at the situation. Like, I tend to look at, even with forgiveness of any person, I try to look at them like, well, what if that person were my child and they made like an error and their judgment made, because a lot of times we think because a person's lived a lot of years that they've somehow mentally and psychologically and emotionally evolved, when they may be 70 years old and operating like a 4-year-old. And so I approach them with the energy that they come with. So if this person's being as if they're like a child, a toddler or something like that, I just kind of in myself say, okay, this person is operating as a toddler. I'm going to communicate to them in that same way. I might not go like, ooh, or something like that. But
I'd like
will,
to see that.
emotionally, I'll kind of connect with them there. And my wanting them to understand is not for me. I'm wanting them to understand for them so that they can move into the next stage of their development. And then as they move into their next stage of the development, we can increasingly engage and deepen if that's what's called for. That person can't evolve beyond that. That's just the situation at hand. And I'm not going to expect anything from them. I'm not holding it against them. They're just not capable. And so I'll just be like, okay, that person just can't function beyond a 4-year-old mindset. So I'll trust them with some French fries, but I won't trust them with my wallet, or something to that effect.
Well, it sounds to me like, on the last question of what does forgiveness mean and what does it not include, it sounds to me like forgiveness does not mean that there's no consequences.
Yes.
Consequences still exist. It's and sometimes you call them accountability and sometimes we call them consequences. But, with my stepfather, the consequence for us was that we never spoke again. And he died, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now. And we never reconciled. And I'm okay with that because the forgiveness lived here in my heart and he was whoever he was. And the consequence, that was the consequence. The consequence of my verbal abuse of my ex-husband, Cooley is what I actually call him, was that we got divorced. That was the consequence that I have to live with. It doesn't mean that I can't forgive myself and learn and grow. So I think that's I really appreciate that we got to this point so I could kind of figure that distinction out for myself, that forgiveness is not a lack of consequence.
I'm glad you brought up about the consequence. It's also about energy within your body.
Yeah.
I believe that if you're able to forgive, it frees up part of your energy. If you're holding on to emotional hurts and pains, it's going to manifest itself physically somehow. And so that's one consequence of actually learning to forgive, because then you let it go, you let that pain go, and so that a different type of energy like love and kindness can come in rather than holding on to the pain of anger or jealousy or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we could go into reflection now, and if it's helpful, I can put the questions up there for everyone. But as I'm copying and pasting them, it basically says, in one sentence, share what was most meaningful or valuable to you in the experience of this living room conversation. What new understanding or common ground did you find within this topic? And has this conversation changed your perception of anyone in this group, including yourself? And just answer one or so of those questions.
Are you calling on us or is it popcorn?
Since you spoke, you can go.
Okay. Well, I already started the reflection that kind of new concept for me of consequence and forgiveness are not simultaneous. And it goes along with what John was saying about accountability. And I think I have found common ground that we all have, those of us who've had, traumatic forgiveness experiences happen. It has been a similar path or journey. It's been had to be repeated many times before, and still does, for me, still does on occasion. But I find that comforting in some way.
Guess we can go with Jamie. You fine with going? Okay.
Sure. I think I'll answer the third question. And I would say that this conversation has really changed my perception of myself. I knew that I tended to be a grudge holder, but I guess I never really thought about how much that was holding me back personally and how much I haven't forgiven. And I think, moving forward, that's something I want to work on a lot and just, be more conscious of, I guess.
I'll go next. My heart is filled up with listening to all your stories, and I feel like my heart is just keeps expanding with this conversation of forgiveness, and I'm so grateful to the Indigenous elders all over the world who said this is one of the key things to get in right relationship with yourself, each other, and even the earth. And as I just wanted to let you know in this conversation, as I've traveled around the world about with my book, is this is the number one of the 4 gifts that people end up leaning into and wanting to talk about. And so whether you're poor or rich, whatever color your skin is, wealthy, whatever, political, but it's so powerful, and it makes me more and more curious about how much more I could love myself if I could use this gift even more readily, and how hopeful I am. I might be getting the next question. Hopeful I am when I hear each of you and your stories of forgiveness or contemplating it.
All right, Jane.
Okay. I really enjoyed this conversation. I liked everyone's perspective of forgiveness and how everyone handles it a little bit differently. Maybe we all aren't at the same level, but I think it's okay. If you're at peace with yourself and how you're handling your forgiveness and you're still a good person, I think that's what's important. But I really did enjoy the conversation.
All right, Kyoli.
So I wanted to speak to Jamie. So Jamie, you're 23, right? You take me back to when I was that age. I'm 44. I'll be 44 this year. And you are where you're meant to be. If you can't, and it's hard for you to forgive right now, that's okay. I remember being in my 20s and having grudges, and I had, it was hard for me during that time. I remember not talking to my sister for like 2 years, when we're teenagers. And then I would have another grudge with a friend for another, few years. So it's a process. That's why I was asking, can we make this process shorter? It's not easy, but you're where you need to be. We all are. Each of us has a journey that we have to go through, and it's a learning process. It was, when I was turned 40, I actually looked up to see if there was any research about the brain. And it did say like people in their mid 30s, early 40s or something, there's a certain part of their brain that matures during that time. And that's during self-reflection. So, you're in your 20s, it's okay. Have the grudge if you need to. But do realize, that in the future, if you ever do want to forgive, it is very healing.
All right, so John, and then I'll close it out.
So I spoke about a practice that I have that I've spent a lot of years with and sharing with others, but until you're in an environment where you hear different perspectives, you don't realize you're sort of in a little bit of a closed system. And I just felt this was very enriching, and I just loved hearing everybody's heartfulness and struggles with this issue, and I feel enriched by it, and just so grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah. So for me, I've been blessed to have a lot of opportunities to experience synchronicity in my life, and there's something really synchronistic about this conversation and the timing and everything. And someone that I was having a conversation with about forgiveness asked me some questions, and then they said, well, what about murder? And they were like, I'd like to hear a story about that. And so I honor you, Anita, for sharing your story and allowing it to be a part of our stories. And so that's, valuable to me. And it's, I like to let stuff kind of sit sometimes, and just kind of, so I'm interested in seeing how you drop in this stone in the lake of my being, where the ripple is going to go. So just kind of going to sit with that. So that's it for the reflection round. The last round is accomplishment and moving forward. And in some ways, we probably touched on it in our reflection. I can post those as well. But the questions for people viewing it outside of the room are name one important thing that was accomplished here, and is there a next step you would like to take based on the conversation you just had? And answer both of those, and I'll post them in the chat room. And I guess, Julie, you can start us off.
Okay. I think the one important thing here is just sharing everybody's perspective about what forgiveness is all about, and just being able to hear the stories and each person's perspective. That was most important to me. The diversity, the different age groups here was also very helpful. Moving forward, I have a friend that I haven't forgiven her yet, but, and we're mutual friends with someone in Seattle. And so I finally, because this was coming up, I was like, oh, I should forgive her. It's been too long. And so I finally decided, let's have a girls' weekend getaway. And I'm planning on reaching out to her and see if she wants to join us. So yeah, I'm very happy about that. My heart is lighter.
So you went through the process.
It took 8 years.
You're there.
There.
So Jane, how about you for the last 2 questions?
I just enjoyed hearing everyone's perspective. And Jamie, I have a granddaughter that's 20, and she's pretty much like you, as far as a little bit rigid in her forgiveness. But you're open to saying that. I don't think she is. I think she thinks everything is everyone else's fault. So I think that you were refreshing to at least be able to verbalize your struggle with forgiveness. And I think I agree with Kaylee. That's where you belong. That's your age. I'm much older and wiser, and still have issues with forgiveness. But I know that.
Is there a next step you want to, based on the conversation, Jane?
My next step? Oh, I continue to work on things. I go to yoga. I'm trying to get into meditation and be, a little more spiritual and less linear than I am. But I continue to work on myself.
Okay. Debbie.
Yeah, one important thing that was accomplished here was just, a dedicated listening group, always important, and all the multiple perspectives, and kind of touched on some of my other learning with the power of TED and the drama triangle and the antidote to the I've heard elements of the persecutor, victim, rescuer, and the co-creator, challenger, coach, all in this conversation. And so that's an important thing that I'm going to think about and probably write a blog about. I also want to declare for my next step that I want to look at this also on a macro level. So Anita, I'm going to reach out to you on looking at kind of like this, how do those of us who are considered white help with the healing process if we can? Because even though I didn't personally take the land, I benefited from it, and I don't know what to do with this. So that's my next step. I'll reach out to you.
Thank you for that, Devlin. I took that right to my heart. It's in my mind, but it's right to my heart. And that takes me to, I think for me, the gift of forgiving is a huge one. But to get there is listening. And so there's a process of forgiveness that happened just listening to the different places we each are on forgiveness. So I love that. And I also know that, Devlin, I will stay open to you on the first. And I don't mean this as a plug, but just to say this is important. On the first, in Whole Food Stores is an article on the book, The 4 Sacred Gifts, Indigenous Wisdom for Modern Times. And my hope is that white people brown people, black people, all ages, races, colors, everything, look at the possibility of those gifts for their lives so that we can really be in connection. So I'm really grateful to Living Room Conversations right now too, for making this possible for people to listen to us and hopefully be, inspired to have the conversation with themselves and with others. Because we all deserve it. We all deserve a world that's really thriving for us and for future generations. And I'm committed to that.
So, John.
I guess what I've been particularly mindful of during this conversation is what a strong container the Living Room Conversation framework created for a shared sense of trust. A bunch of strangers from across the country, and I just sense that each of us were willing to open up and share authentically and heartfully, and give each other a peek into our souls, even in a sense. And to me, that's an experience beyond expression, and it just motivates me to look for more opportunities to be in this beautiful sharing moment.
All right, Jamie.
Yeah, so when we were picking the conversation topic, I honestly was a little bit skeptical of forgiveness as the topic, because I was like, what are we even going to talk about? And I feel like I've done a complete 180 on that, because this has been just very meaningful to me to talk about this and to hear where everyone is, like, in the amazing forgiveness stories that you guys have, and a little reassurance that I'm not the only one that it's hard for, but that it maybe gets a little easier. And yeah, that's just, it's been a lot of self-reflection for me in this conversation. And I think my next step is to be more conscious of forgiveness, probably do some more reading, and also to talk about this with my friends, because I feel like, it's probably something that I was holding in and didn't feel like I could talk about with other people, but now I see that I can, and that it's important to talk about. So yeah, I think that's my next step.
So I'll go, and then I'll have Anita close us out, this sacred circle. So close the hoop, and then and we'll say goodbye to each other and to whoever views this in the future. So for myself, I think that the most important thing that I accomplished here was the diversity of expression and experience, and almost every other way that you could have a diversity, we happen to have it here. And this is probably the most diverse living room conversation that I've had from so many different perspectives. And so it's beautiful to see that the topic of forgiveness drew in this level of diversity, because on some level, I'm allowing this in my inner being to be indicative of a universal desire to come together and to learn how to be a sacred community, to forgive hurts, both local and recent, and ones that extend through history. So I'm very encouraged by that. In terms of next steps, I have been contemplating writing a story about forgiveness between the African American narrative and the people who consider themselves white narrative, and using it from a perspective from a different culture that's not Black or white. And I kind of was like, should I do that? I don't know if I should bleed into someone else's culture like that, but I feel like I will. And just kind of work on it and see what comes out of it. So I'm going to continue to meditate on that, and hopefully it'll come to the surface. So that's where I am. Anita.
Yes. I just want to big heartfelt thank you to each of you for taking this time out of your days and your evenings to be together and to really have listened. I felt like you were listening with the softest part of your ear and the softest part of your heart, not leaving the mind behind. We need that too. But I think that's really valuable. And I just want to say, on behalf of the elders from all over the world who created the hoop with 100 eagle feathers, and the hoop is for all the directions to remind us that some of us come in red suits, brown suits, black suits, yellow suits, but we're all one human race. We have a lot to work on, a lot. And these 4 gifts, this first one, forgiving the unforgivable, is a worthy one of us. And so just thank you very much. And final word in terms of completing this living room conversation is that do not forget to complete the feedback form. It's really valuable. Living room conversations really takes us to heart, wanting to make this better and better for everyone to engage in the conversations that matter. So thank you, and have the very best rest of their day and week. Goodbye, new
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Big hugs. Group hug.
And for people who haven't, who are watching this on video, just wanted to say that if you have space and you have the desire to express yourself, you can always do an LRC, and it's open source. Go to the livingroomconversations.org and have a conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.